Welcome. Good afternoon. I feel a lot of energy in the room, so I'm going to start 15 seconds early. Welcome to the end of, day 3 today? Thank you for coming out at 4 in the afternoon, right before dinner and in between coffee breaks. I am Michelle Erberg. I'm the Client Success Manager at LibLinks, and I wear a lot of hats there, but today we're talking about the hat that I wear pertaining to open access analytics, and I'm helping to moderate the panel with these lovely, very intelligent and great speaking panelists. So we are today speaking on measuring social benefit, the future of OA analytics. And this panel is intentionally going to be interactive. So put on your thinking hats, prepare your questions and comments. We're going to let our panelists have first go at our provocation here in a second. And then you all are welcome to start throwing questions at us and comments, and we hope that this will be truly a lively discussion. So our goal today is actually to leave all of our audience members with new insights about how publishers, libraries, and vendors, and funders, and researchers, and everybody else in this ecosystem are working together to measure and express the social impact of open access content and programs. There's been a lot of panels on open access content here, and so hopefully that will all feed into our discussion that we're about to have. Just as a reminder, we participate in our discussion under the Charleston Code of Conduct. And then also, I understand we have to be very, very mindful this session is being recorded and will be part of the December conference. So if it gets very exciting, just wait your turn until our helpful moderator will be around with the microphone to allow your voice to be shared with the recording. All right, this is our provocation. Traditional usage metrics and tools are no longer fit for purpose. As libraries and publishers adapt to open access publishing paradigm shifts. Okay, so think about what those metrics are and the open access paradigm shifts that we are undertaking.
Advance. There you go.
Oh, right. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Demand is growing to measure societal impacts of scholarly publishing. However, downloads do not sufficiently express the value to the public research endeavors, and usage analytics can be seen as an invasion of library and patron privacy policies. So think about all of the things that Google tracks for us and how much of that we want to be counted. Okay. Libraries measure impact differently than their institutions, but they seek to measure the same impacts as do publishers, we're going to argue. All of this are coming to OA metrics with different agendas. So we're going to talk about what some of those agendas are, figure out how to find a middle ground in between those. I think that is it. So I will cede the floor then to our first panelist. They will all introduce themselves, by the way.
Oh, that's me. Hi, I'm Elliot Hibbler. I'm the head of scholarly communications at Boston College. The quick disclaimers, I'm not speaking on behalf of my institution. And also, I'm going to say articles and journals a lot, but all that I say can apply to book chapters and other content too. I just can't consistently say the phrase research output. It's a little impersonal. And I want to talk about measuring the societal impact of open access. Now, when approaching this topic, I first wrestled with the question of what's different about open access.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is it possible for you to stand up when you talk because I can't see you?
We can,
I can.
do you want to trade spots?
I can trade spots.
Okay, let's trade spots. Okay.
Good.
All right. Yeah. So I was wrestling with the question of what is different about open access, because I also want all of the research we publish behind a paywall to have societal impact too. It's not that it shouldn't. It's just what's different about open access. And I think it really comes down to storytelling. Librarians tell stories with usage analytics, sometimes short stories, but stories. With paywalled articles, that story is about our researcher community using the materials we have. We paid for them. We worked hard to make them discoverable and accessible. And the story is about how they use them or how they don't use them, and then we stop paying for them. But with open access, the story's different. We, And here, we could be the library with the transformational agreement, or we could be the larger institution paying for things with an open access fund or other research funds. We're spending the money because we want to push our scholarship out into the world. We do this because part of our mission is to make the world better through knowledge, and we do that best when everyone can access our scholarship regardless of ability to pay. Now, that's a lofty goal, but it is a goal, and goals need to be measured in this society. So we have to think about how we measure that goal. And usage is, of course, a part of this. Not the traditional usage, where we're looking at how much our community is using stuff, but usage by the world. And we also still have to measure institutional cost, so it's really usage for the amount of money we're spending. And cost is a little easier to talk about, so I'll just mention that for a moment. We, of course, get reports on our transformational agreements about how our authors are using these agreements. We don't always find out about when authors publish outside of our agreements, which would be great to hear from publishers to tell our impact story. But, we can dig around and find some of that information if we have to. We don't always find out about our publishers and what grants they're using for funding. Another thing we could dig around and find if we need to. But that's not really a scalable solution right now in terms of digging around. So we do need to find some more funding data. But I really want to talk a little more about how we measure that impact. And I really break impact into two buckets, scholarly and societal. Scholarly impact is generally the information institutions have traditionally and unfortunately used in terms of rating faculty and making employment decisions, the citation count, journal characteristics, maybe download count from some platforms. I don't actually think that goes away with open access, but I'm just going to leave that alone. But we do want more explicit data on who is using the work, how frequently, and just how they're using it. This is where views and downloads could be more important, and depending on the article, where those downloads are happening. It could be if those downloads are even human or not. It could also be looking at usage, not just in downloads, but in other types of material than scholarly, like policy papers, that type of thing. Now, this is where it gets into trouble because this really bumps into some serious privacy implications for libraries. And I'm certainly not inviting vendors, even the ones here, to start tracking users at the individual level. It could even be dangerous for some users in this environment for readers to be identified as using some open access material. And this is where I think librarians, publishers, and vendors are going to have to work together to hash out some of those privacy principles. Now, one thing that makes me optimistic about this is that this is an area where publishers and libraries are very much aligned. Publishers have mission and business incentives for the work they publish to have societal impact, and they have the incentive to show it, just like we do. And I just want to think of a couple other challenges right now for this OA data. One is context. If I told you an article was downloaded 100 times, is that good? Well, it depends. We can say, but who downloaded it? But no, we're not actually going to ask that question. But what if I told you every other article in Open Journal X was downloaded 100,000 times? All of a sudden, that sounds a little less impactful. And we also have to be really mindful about making comparisons across disciplines. What's impactful for a social work school might not be impactful for the English department, but I don't want to say, and I don't believe that English is less impactful, it's just impacting in different ways. Two, while we know the canonical version of an article might be on a publisher website, if it's open access, that article could be posted in a lot of places. And there are going to be some real challenges to how to combine usage of different articles that are hosted on different sites, and to think about versions of record and things like that. And finally, I have to mention AI. I think it's a requirement. And all of us need to figure out a way to determine usage from AI. I bring this up because we know, particularly for open access articles, a lot of that content is being used in large language models and even the retrieval augmented generation that other vendors use. And that makes that content that might not register as a traditional use, but that content is appearing in the text people are reading. So how do we capture that? And then finally, I'd be interested if publishers could gather some qualitative data from users interacting with OA articles on their platform and pass that along. but I'm getting a little beyond the current state of the art, perhaps. So I'll pass it on to Kelsey, who might have some things to say about that.
Should we just keep playing music chairs? I'm gonna let you go ahead first. Here we go. I'm gonna go back to the initial provocation too, just because it's quite lengthy, so that you can have a chance to read through this one as well. But first, I'll introduce myself once I get this on here.
Make sure you're in the mic. It's not going to be
I'm too short. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's loud. Okay, great. Awesome. My name is Kelsey Merjoyan, and I'm the Library Relations Manager at University of Michigan Press, Michigan Publishing. So working with measuring societal benefit and impact of open access, specifically open access monographs, is really kind of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So as we all know, usage data, the quantitative side of things, is extremely helpful. It's very necessary depending on who you're talking to. It may be needed to measure a specific metric. It'll tell you, how often usage is occurring, in some cases, where it's occurring. That could be a little bit more qualitative, but it's all important information that is necessary. We know that open access equals higher usage. Of course it does. If something is not behind a paywall and you take that barrier down, then there's going to be more access to it. It may not, hopefully there's more discoverability too, but that may not always go hand in hand. But we're at a point now, specifically with open access monographs, that there are many options. There's many routes that you can support, and the usage information that we have is no longer sufficient to show, oh, look, there's a lot of usage, it must be impactful. That is part of the story that we are looking to tell, but it's not the entire story. So we really have to look at open access impact through a different lens. And so what better lens to look at it through? How is it impacting the society, the actual people that are reading it, whether that's inside of the academic landscape or not? We always want to understand how they're using books, how it's benefiting those users, what they're doing with it, what their background is. And the more information that we can have about who is reading open access, the better we can understand the impact that it's having. So from a publisher perspective, that means that being able to communicate this information to authors who are looking to publish open access, that want to know who's reading the books, how is it getting to the hands of the people that we really want it to? For libraries, that is, particularly in my individual role, I'm working with libraries to get funding for open access collections. So being able to demonstrate that your budget, your dollars that you are spending to support this collection is actually having meaningful impact within society outside of here's your usage report, although that is still important. And then internally at Michigan, we do get some funding from our provost that helps us be a lot more sustainable in this initiative. So we have to demonstrate internally why it's important to keep funding open access, that showing that it is being used is not just a sufficient way to demonstrate that. So I know we'll get into this a little bit further on, but I'll briefly mention, for those of you that were at the panel that I spoke at earlier this morning, you might have already heard this, but one way that we've been trying to get at this societal impact is by conducting or taking these, what are called the Fulcrum Reader Survey responses, where if someone is reading an open access title on our platform, the Fulcrum platform, they are invited to participate in a survey. It gives them the option to let us know how they're using the book, who they are, what they plan to do with it. And there's some open-ended questions that's just, what else do you want to tell us? Or tell us anything else that you would like to share. And people really want to share. So we get a lot of very personal information coming through. Some will give us their names, their emails, their phone numbers, and they're trying to explain why this book is really important to them. But then that's when we kind of butt up to patron privacy. And as we're trying to be transparent and share this impact that we're having with open access, we have to be aware that we don't want to share private information that is not intended for that use. So that's kind of something that we're dealing with a little bit right now at Michigan, and hoping to sort out what kind of tools can we implement to make sure that those patrons are protected, the impact is communicated, and that we're all kind of understanding how what we're doing is actually affecting society as a whole. So I'll cut myself off there and bring it over to Letty.
I'll go this way.
That's probably makes more sense.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Letty Conrad. I'm currently wearing my product experience architect hat with LibLinks. And I'm coming to this provocation from the perspective of 15 years in product design and product development, and most recently a PhD in the information science space, looking at the experience of information for researchers, students, faculty, and others. So in that context, I'm seeing real challenges with our current tools available for understanding usage and getting the right metrics together. They are not fit for purpose, in part because data are too isolated, too limited, if you will, to counting the number of logins, counting hits, downloads. What do those mean? They are a bit lacking in the context that we need to make those metrics meaningful. We are not able currently, with the tools that most of us are using, we're really not able to express meaningful metrics or to understand the why behind those hits and downloads. And data are also right now really geared toward closed access models. So the models, open access models, are requiring different insights. They're asking different questions. They're looking for different ways of measuring impact, right? Libraries and publishers need to reflect social benefit, social impact. As Kelsey was mentioning the panel this morning, that if you missed, check it out in December. It was amazing, specifically focusing on how publishers are using analytics to do good in their monograph and book publishing programs. And what that means in actuality is understanding, for instance, that their open monographs are reaching maybe those in prison. They're changing the minds of policymakers when it comes to Title IX requirements for women in sports. They're using search logs to understand what people are looking for and how they're engaging with the content. So our current tools are not terribly intuitive as well. I don't know about you all, but I am not a data scientist. When I go into Google Analytics these days or try to conquer Tableau or Power BI, it's daunting. Even just looking at a spreadsheet. How do I translate that spreadsheet into a story, a human story about what's actually going on behind those numbers? These tools that really aren't geared toward non-technical users. They're meant for sort of the power users, the analysts, if you will. So the project that we're working on at LibLinks, one of the projects that I'm leading at LibLinks, is focused on research and development of new ways of engaging with analytics. And it's super exciting because we're getting a chance to, as Kelsey mentioned, sort of take some qualitative data as well as some quantitative data and understand what it is we can do to really change the landscape of how we interact with data and how we might empower one another to tell stories from the data and to unearth some of the meaning behind those metrics, so that we're not just, trying to understand if 100 downloads is good. And if we even set benchmarks, if we decide, okay, that is good, we are happy with those 100 downloads. What impact does that have on the people who are reading? What are they doing with it? How is it changing their lives? Are they looking at building a startup? Are they working on a degree? We don't know any of that behind the data. So there's more to be done as far as really empowering the data that we use. So that's my response to our provocation. And now we want to hear from you all. Thoughts, questions? Oh, sorry, I can just leave your seat. This was all for John, everyone. John Lavender.
I think when I'd ask you a question, but
Looks like Robin's got one.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Robin from Iowa State. It's a great provocation, but it's one we've all kind of been faced with for 15 or 20 years now.
Correct.
From the time of what does a circ a checkout mean? Does it mean it even got home with the student, or did they leave it in their friend's dorm room and then turn it back in when it was due? Or did they use it to prop open the window? All those ludicrous things you think of when you're trying to explain the data. So I think open access has made us circle around and think really, really hard about this again. And I'm hopeful that we'll find more ways to do more qualitative work, like Kelsey was talking about, because that's where we're going to get those cool stories and the meaningful stories. I don't want to stop anybody from making analytics make more sense, because I'm with Letty. It's just like, numbers. But if we need a way to scale the qualitative ability to gather those stories, and I don't know how to do that, but I'm hopeful someone will do it.
Yep. Scalability, absolutely.
Hey everyone, it's Christina Drummond. I'm the executive director of the Open Access Book Usage Data Trust. I know a couple of you up there. So one of the things I'll just note, this is incredible provocation, and as we think of, and I'll quote something from Michelle's talk earlier at another panel as well, the counter standards 25 years old, Google Analytics 15 years old. And those standards are so helpful when we think about interoperability, so that we know we can compare across and have the conversation with each other. So given this provocation and your positions, do you see emerging needs for standards or things that we should be thinking about with interoperability in the future?
I mean, I do, but I'm the moderator, so I'm not going to speak.
Pass that buck.
I'm going to pass. I'm totally passing it. So I will leave it to the panelists.
I think the short answer is yes. I often talk about metadata knowing just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to necessarily move the needle as far as how to operationalize standards. And as we all know, if anyone's worked with BISG or NISO or other standards organizations, it's one thing to set a beautiful recommended practice or to even ratify a standard, but actually inspiring action and changing practice is something different. So that's the meta response. But specifically, when it comes to transforming our usage data into more meaningful metrics, rich metadata pipelines are key. And we're talking about getting a triangulation of, it's not just hits, right? It's events. Pick your events. You love hits, stay with hits. But hits alone won't tell you. You need a time variable, you need a regional variable, you need a subject variable. And then, as we've been talking about, you need some qualitative data to lay on top of that to understand what is the story going on in this region, in this field of study. So it's definitely a labor-intensive, sort of approach, I think, that we're envisioning, but it's one that is possible for us to come together and scale. So metadata is the first thought that comes to my mind.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it would be great to have that interoperability we have it in a sense for the quantitative side. And I think that's why, kind of to Robin's point, that we have been circling around and there isn't that same kind of agreed upon metric with qualitative, because that's obviously opposite of what it really is. So trying to sort out, how do we take that very standard quantitative approach that is agreed upon across the board and try to maybe set some type of standard or best practices or something around the qualitative side, so that we can pair those up nicely and paint that real overall picture of what that real world impact is, without having to justify, say that this is the quantitative side, this is the qualitative side, but talk about it a little bit more collectively.
Mixed methods, yay!
Yeah, and I would add for those best practices that we really will need something for privacy in particular, just so when libraries are contracting with vendors, the vendor can say, oh, we abide by this best practice or this standard, and then we don't have to negotiate every single vendor's privacy policy when it comes to collecting some of this qualitative data, if that's the direction we move in.
Take either of you. I'll leave it to the moderator to choose. There were two hands over here. Yeah.
I think this is just more of a comment, actually, but it's not just, I think the thing that's changing as well is it's not just the final product, right, as well. So you want to see the project in context. So was there a preprint, or was there an earlier version of the book, or whatever supplemental materials. So I think that's in terms of usage, having the ability to connect those different pieces of the research or the scholarship that's happening and look at the whole picture as opposed to one piece of it is really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, the metrics are almost different based on publication type to some degree. The metadata certainly needs to be, so the way we translate those metrics need to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really good point.
Absolutely.
My question/comment was very similar, actually. Looking at indicators out of context is really dangerous, and should be considered alongside, the full picture of what the researchers' behavior was and their activities were. So, for example, did book sales increase after they gave a talk to history teachers, or these are indicators. They don't mean anything other than potentially assessing whether a researcher's engagement activities were successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, in response...
Sorry, that's a provocation.
It is a provocation. I was going to say, I was going to
Yeah,
respond to
it
that. Do I have permission to respond?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So I think about different audiences, right? Like the use case that you're talking about there, and then I'll cede the floor to other people who can talk about use cases. Like the person who's selling something might care that if book sales do increase once they go to pitch to the 50 history teachers in their sales region, like that will matter. That same information will probably not matter to the researcher who published that history book in the first place. And it may matter to the funder who helped to fund it, but maybe not to the libraries because it's a sales use case. So just thinking about different data points as they relate to who needs the data. I will hand it back to y'all.
Yeah, I can jump on that. That definitely is, I feel like a good way to respond there. That I think a lot of it does depend on who are you talking to in that sense. Was the audience? They're all going to be interested in different aspects. So someone that is very centered on sales would probably care about that, but someone else that really wants to know who is reading my book that I put out that I'm very invested in. I want to make sure it's reaching the researchers that I've intended for it's not going to be quite as important, or maybe not at all. And so being aware that each stakeholder, each audience is going to have a different interest in the word impact that can mean a lot of things to different people, and knowing that we have to be talking to all of those different people and recognize that while the quantitative side could be very important for some, it may not be for others, and it doesn't mean that one is better or worse than another. It's just that different parties are going to need different information, and will take that impact differently.
If I can just add to that, that's part of it. We'll get to you next. That's part of the context piece, I think, right? And so going back to my purpose for being here, this R&D project is in part looking to unearth those use cases, as well as how our community is defining success. What are the success metrics? What are the impact metrics? And they're not going to be the same across institutions, across fields of study, across regions. So we need tools that are flexible enough for folks to indicate their own benchmarks and dive in and explore the data in a way that makes sense within that context.
So John Banionis from Villanova University. When we think about ROI in the library with the subscription journal, it's usually cost per use. But if we're funding an open access article through an APC, if there's a way, we can have kind of universal access to article level usage of that APC funded article, that's a way for the library to kind of demonstrate impact and ROI on that investment. And that might be a good way to kind of think about how we are investing in those articles that way, showing a similar, even though it's not just usage at our institution, but it's global impact, and showing how those dollars are going to really good use.
Absolutely. Elliot, you work with articles, I think, the most of all of us here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you want to speak to that?
Oh, yeah. I think that looking at the use of the articles that we fund through APCs is going to be a really important part of the story, both in justifying it to our broader institution why we're spending that money, and also to talking to the individual author to help them see, this is the benefit of open access. So I think we would be able to use that information both for ROI, for the financial people, and also for outreach for the more liaison type people.
I would just add to that one other quick thought. As we're talking about this, I'm realizing we're talking way beyond counter metrics. We're talking way beyond behavioral metrics in Google Analytics, et cetera. We're talking about mashing up lots of different data types, right? APCs, search logs, other points of intelligence that will speak to the context. So I think, again, back to, the kind of tools piece, giving every one of us experts the freedom and the ability to mash up the data that makes sense and that speaks to the context that we're, of the communities that we're serving. That's something we can't do now. I mean, I know of some incredible stories of hand wrought, macros and Excel files of people who are way more talented at this than I. But that's incredible manual work, and none of the software right now is allowing the flexibility that we need.
Yeah, and I can, go ahead.
Oh, you want to go?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Niels.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you. I'm Niels Stone from the OAPEN Foundation, and we have a platform for peer-reviewed open access books. And I just want to basically mention a tool or a method that our CTO, Ronald Schneider, did last year. So he was analyzing lots of those books, perhaps half of the 40,000 books in the library, and made what he called a Tony score. So what is a Tony score? So it's trying to make a transparent index where you look at the book in terms of language and subject. So his method is to compare books in the same language within the same subject. So you are basically trying to, let's say, normalize the research outputs, the books, in this case, based on, it makes a big difference whether the book is in English or in Danish, which is my language, or another language. And of course, if it's in philosophy or in history or in other disciplines. So just trying to, tweak with the data and work with that data. That's one way of at least addressing some of this. But I know there are many more ways, of course, but just as an example, he published an article last year about it.
Can you spell out that acronym?
Yeah, TOANI.
TOANI. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
we joked a lot about Tony for a while.
Tony, got it.
Thank you for that.